Hello, Mishpacha, it's Courtney, America's Jewish Mother, and welcome back to my channel. I am here today with my wrap-up of my November readings. So in November, I read 9 books, which I'm still pretty proud of, especially considering that within the past 8 days, I have graded 90 papers, calculated 90 participation grades, and submitted a grant proposal, all in the past 8 days. So yeah, I feel pretty good about 9 books in November. Especially also considering all of the election chaos and everything. So yeah, let's go. So as usual, I'm going to rank these in order from the one I liked least all the way up to the one that I liked the best. And I will say I actually did not have any terrible reads this month. I didn't rate anything lower than 3 stars, and 3-star books for me are books that I basically would recommend with some reservations. Anything that's 3.5 stars or higher, I'm like, yep, this was good, I recommend it. So just to give you a little index there. The book that I liked the least this month was William Deresiewicz's Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite and the Way to a Meaningful Life. And basically, this book started out strong for me. The first, like 80 pages or something like that, I thought were quite good, and that's really where Deresiewicz most fully develops the sort of central thesis or premise of this book, which is that students who attend Ivy League institutions, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, etc., have been sort of put on the path of success so much all of their lives that they are stifled intellectually and creatively, and even in terms of their critical thinking, because all they've been taught is to just succeed and to be ambitious and to do whatever the proper thing is to do and not actually question it at all. So I think that's a very intriguing premise. But yeah, the whole middle part of the book I just really did not like, and then it sort of picked back up at the end again. But it was kind of a real roller coaster for me, so I would, especially if you work in higher education, I would recommend it for the first third and the last 2 chapters. But yeah, the whole middle part I totally could have done without. And so for that reason, this book sort of disappointed me because it did start off so strong, and then it just went, ooh, and then it dipped a little bit up at the end. So yeah. So that was my least favorite book this month, 3 stars. My number 8 book, I don't have here with me because it's already been sent back to the library, but that was Paradise by Toni Morrison. I also rated that 3 stars. I read this for our November pick at Barter Horde's Backlist Book Club. And, you know, Paradise was fine. I don't think it's the greatest Toni Morrison book. I think it's a good book to read if you like books that are about themes and ideas, more so than you like books that are really character-driven and or plot-driven. Because this is a book that's really more about the all-black town of Ruby, in which it is centered, and also the convent, which is a shelter for women that's located several miles outside the town of Ruby. It's really more about the interplay between those two forces or institutions, more than it is about specific people within them, even though we do follow specific people throughout. But because it's Toni Morrison, you're certainly going to get beautiful writing and you're going to get complex ideas, and this book is no different in that respect. But it is, as I said when I wrapped it up, quite biblical in some ways, including the fact that it somewhat follows a biblical structure in its narrative telling, and so for that reason it's quite dense. So 3 stars. The 7th book, or the book that I liked that's in 7th place, I guess, is Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. This was a reread for me. I taught this as the last book of the semester in my online class in the novel. And this is a book of ideas, I think, more than it is. I mean, it has characters, right? Like, we follow Cora and Caesar. I mean, mainly we follow Cora, but we also follow Cora and Caesar at some point throughout. But I did not feel connected enough or invested enough in the character of Cora as I felt like I should have been. But I do think Whitehead brings up some very interesting ideas, especially with the interplay of racism and capitalism in this book. Also with things like medical racism. So it's definitely a book that has a lot of smart ideas and smart things to say. So I would recommend it for that reason. There also is some very nice writing at points. But yeah, I just ultimately did not feel as connected to Cora as I wanted to, and I also didn't like that Whitehead kept introducing new characters like way late into the novel, right? Like within the last 30 pages, I'm still meeting new characters, and I'm like, what is happening? So I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. Oh, by the way, I should really say more about the premise. This book follows Cora and Caesar, who are enslaved on the Randall Plantation as they attempt to make their way to freedom on, in this book, a literal underground railroad, just like an actual train and stuff. And they go through different states in their travels. And this is a neo-slave narrative with some touches of magical realism in it. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth the read, even if I didn't feel as connected to Cora as I would have liked. So 3.5 stars. I also, in 6th place, gave 3.5 stars to Anne Petry's The Street. This is the story primarily of Ludi Johnson, who is a newly single mother and has moved with her, I believe, 8-year-old son, Bub, to basically kind of like a slum sort of apartment. And she's kind of constantly thinking throughout the book how she's going to survive as a newly single mother, how she's going to provide for her son, how she can get them both away from the street, and what staying in this particular street will do to them long term if she's not able to get them out of this living situation and into better circumstances. So it primarily follows Ludi, although we do also follow the perspective of some other characters that live at this apartment building as well. And I kind of wish that we had followed Ludi a little bit more primarily throughout, and maybe not heard from some characters or heard less from others of them. Because I wasn't exactly sure what the point was of introducing these different perspectives if we were only going to get them for like one chapter. So, but overall I liked it. I think this book also, like Whitehead's The Underground Railroad, has a lot of smart things to say about racism and about being a black woman, especially given the time period in which this was published, which was, I believe, in the 1940s, early 1940s. And in some ways this book is in conversation with other works of that era, like Richard Wright's Native Son, Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man, Zora Neale Hurston's Our Eyes Were Watching God, and it's sort of a lesser-known African-American classic, so I'd certainly recommend it if you are interested in African-American literature, especially African-American literature written by women, and especially in the first half of the 20th century. So 3.5 stars. And then I also, in 5th place, gave 3.5 stars to Carson McCullers' The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. Which is funny because this was published around the same time period as The Street was. Anyway, so this book follows 5 different characters. I think that's right. So this book really revolves around a deaf-mute man named John Singer in a small Georgia town in the 1930s. And we see several characters in this book, including a young girl named Mick Kelly, who's maybe around like 12 or 13 or something when the book starts. An African-American doctor named Benedict Matty Copeland, who's also like a Marxist and atheist. A labor unionist, agitator, socialist kind of guy named Jake Blount, and Biff Brannon. He's the owner of a cafe in town who just sort of likes to watch and sit back and observe people and think about what they're like. So all 4 of those people that I just described all kind of try to befriend Singer throughout the course of the book, and they all come to him and talk to him about their problems and hopes and dreams and wishes and fears, etc., etc. And Singer, this deaf-mute man, is the only person that they all feel like really understands them. So it's a book that really asks questions about if we can ever actually be known by another person or know another person. But some of the characters I would have liked to have heard more from. For example, I personally found the Doctor and Jake Blount to be the 2 most interesting characters, and I would have liked to have heard more about them. And really, I'm not totally sure what Biff Brannon added to this whole narrative. Like, you could have just cut him entirely, and I would have been fine with that. So, but yeah, I also gave this 3.5 stars. And overall, it was enjoyable, and I would certainly recommend it if you are interested in 20th century American literature, and especially literature of the American South. Okay, in 4th place, alright, is a book that I just finished today, which was, and I don't have it here because I read it as an ebook, And this was Oyinkan Braithwaite's My Sister the Serial Killer. I gave this book 3.75 stars. I really enjoyed this book. It is a dark comedy. I guess you could also call it satire as well, about these two sisters in Lagos in Nigeria. Korede, who works as a nurse in a hospital, and Ayoola, her younger sister, who is very beautiful and has pretty much always had the attentions of men from a very young age. But oops, Ayoola's also a serial killer, and every time she accidentally kills one of her boyfriends, Korede has to come help her clean up the mess. And so we just sort of follow the two of them throughout the novel, and there's a doctor that works at the hospital where Korede is a nurse who she really has a big crush on, and then he takes an interest in her sister Ayoola, and so we're kind of wondering, oh gosh, is he going to suffer the same fate as all of the other previous boyfriends have of winding up murdered? So yeah, that's pretty much the setup of the story. And you know, I don't think it's really written in a way that you're meant to take it exactly at face value, but it is comical, and there were some things about it that I thought were very smart, like Ayoola's constant posting of things on social media, even though she's, you know, supposed to be in mourning for her boyfriend who's disappeared, but actually she killed him, right? And she just, like, doesn't understand why she shouldn't be posting about fun things she's doing, like, a week after her boyfriend has mysteriously vanished, you know? So I think the obsession with social media is highlighted. Standards of beauty, especially for women, is highlighted. I really liked the dynamic between the two sisters. I thought that was very deftly portrayed. And yeah, it was just a breezy, entertaining read. It's told in little vignettes, and so occasionally we get a glimpse back into the sisters' childhood, and we see what their life was like for them, especially with respect to their father as they were growing up, and so we get a little insight into why they are the way that they are now. But mostly it takes place over a present-day timeline of several months or something like that. But yeah, I found it really fast-paced, compelling, engaging, and entertaining, so I would recommend it. I think not everyone will like this, but if you like things that are sort of light, breezy, entertaining, and darkly comic, then I would totally recommend it. So I ended up giving that one 3.75 stars, and again, it was my fourth favorite read of the month. My third favorite read of the month was Franz Kafka's The Complete Stories, which I also gave 3.75 stars to. So this is a collection of all of Kafka's stories, published and unpublished, so it contains everything except for his 3 novels. And because this is a short story collection, not all of them are going to be winners. You're not going to connect to all of them in the same way that you connect to others of them, but I would definitely recommend this if you have an interest in Kafka's work or want to know more about his work, because I think there are a lot of great stories in here. Particularly, I really like The Metamorphosis, In the Penal Colony, A Hunger Artist, and A Report to an Academy. And then there are also the second section in here are very short stories that take up, you know, sometimes only a paragraph or half a page, and sometimes, you know, 4 or 5 pages of space. And there's also a play. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this if you like Kafka or want to know more about Kafka. My third favorite book of the month, oh no, that was my third favorite book of the month, sorry. My second favorite book of the month, I don't have here with me. I listened to this as an audiobook. It was Ijeoma, Oluo, So You Want to Talk About Race. I really liked this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. And basically in every chapter, Oluo sets up a question like, what is the prison industrial complex? Why can't I say the N-word? What is cultural appropriation? Etc., etc. And then over the course of the chapter, she proceeds to answer that question. And she infuses the book with both anecdotes from her own personal life as well as some data and statistics. I kind of wish there had been more data and statistics, but otherwise I found the writing style very engaging. There were times where I felt personally challenged by the book, but in a good way, where I felt like I was personally challenged and then I learned something and I grew as a person. So yeah, I really like this. I highly recommend it. And unpopular opinion, maybe, I thought it was really better than How to Be an Anti-Racist. So yeah. And then my favorite book of the month was Ezra Klein's Were Polarized. I also gave this book 4.5 stars. It's really good! And I feel like I've talked about this book a lot already this month, so I'm just not going to just go on and on about it. But yeah, basically Klein explores here, and I also have a full review of it posted elsewhere. But yeah, basically Klein explores here why contemporary American politics have become so polarized, working his way up from like the, 1950s or so to the present day. And we learn about both human psychology and how we sort of self-sort ourselves into groups, as well as the American political system and why it has become more polarized and what that has to do with human psychology, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it's really good. It's excellently researched. It's full of data, but not, just like dry, boring stuff. It's also told in a very good narrative style, I thought. So I would highly recommend this to anyone who's interested in learning more about contemporary American political polarization and or human psychology. So yeah, those were all the books that I read this month. I would love to hear what your favorites of the month were. I would also love to hear if you have thoughts about any of these books. Please feel free to leave me a comment down below. I hope y'all are doing well and staying healthy. I hope you're doing good reading whatever you're reading. And until next time, what did you call your mother?